Hello everyone, it's David. We are about to start another web tutorial webinar on jQuery this time. We're gonna wait a couple more seconds for more people to join. As always, we are streaming to two platforms simultaneously to YouTube and to Facebook at the same time. And as I said, today we're gonna learn how to use one of the most famous, most common, if not the most common or commonly used library, JavaScript library, which will make your life easier. Hey guys, hello Naeem, hello TJ, nice. It's good to see you again. I'm very glad, guys, that you are coming every week, every Tuesday. We're meeting here to learn something new. So we will start in a few minutes. So what I prepared for you today, some of you may remember that we've been 2 weeks back. We've been learning JavaScript and we've been building this to-do app. So today we're gonna learn a little bit more about the jQuery itself, and then at the end, what we're gonna also do is we're gonna try to rewrite our JavaScript application with a jQuery. So just to remind you guys, you can already download a file lesson files from here. So this repository is available for you. And just to let you know that we have this Facebook group where you can ask any questions if you face any issues. I think there was some. I'm getting some information that there was some miscommunication about the hour. So I see that more people are joining. Hey Naeem, I'm actually learning and it feels good. I'm glad for you. I'm happy to hear that. I'm really happy. I got a lot of positive feedback, and guys, that's really awesome. That's what makes me, that's what gives me a hell of a lot of motivation to do it for you. So, okay, guys, we will be starting slowly. I see that the people are still joining. About 50 people right now. Last time we hit like 130, so I see that it's growing. So without further delay, what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with a little bit of theory for the jQuery. So if you guys download the lesson files and you go to the tutorial part, you're gonna find those files here. So all the steps we're gonna perform today are there for you to repeat. So if you start with this one, jQuery, you're gonna what you're gonna see a little bit of theory for you. So jQuery is one of the easiest, if not the easiest, and definitely most popular JavaScript library. So if you really want to start learning web development, I think this is something which everyone should know at least. I mean, a lot of people says that jQuery is about to retire, but I don't believe that. I mean, if you look at the Google Trends on jQuery, well, it's slightly dropping. That's true. But on the other hand, if you see how many people are using our website, how many searches is there, how many people is using that, I mean, and the fact that the Bootstrap itself is using jQuery, and the Bootstrap is also the most common library, it kind of makes me feel that it's gonna stay here for longer. I mean, you're gonna hopefully see that jQuery is very, very useful, and it will make your life easier. It's not perfect for each and every project, and you're gonna see that as well. I mean, if you are building some huge website, some admin dashboard or whatever, jQuery might be a little bit confusing. I mean, you know, it's difficult to maintain a huge amount of code, and that's why we came up with frameworks like Vue, like Angular, and so on. But on the other hand, if you're about to build, like, you know, simple blog page or even simple e-commerce page with like kind of landing page with just few of selling a couple of products, I mean, there is no point in using Angular for this one, right? Like my co-founder used to say, there is no point in using like you know, huge gun to kill a fly. So that's not the point. Okay, guys. So without further delay, let's just have a look at this one. So what are the key jQuery features? It's easy to manipulate DOM. We're gonna learn about DOM in a couple of seconds. If you are not familiar with this one, there is a massive community because it's so widely used. There is a really massive community behind it. So you will very easily find you know, some kind of support if you stuck at certain point. It supports all browsers, all modern browsers. It's chainable. We're gonna learn about it just in a few minutes. About more examples, I'm gonna show you what does it actually mean. Why you should use it? It definitely simplified, and I'm gonna show you an examples, the difference between using the same function in JavaScript and in jQuery. It simplifies everything, like even handling. It's lightweighted. It doesn't add a lot to your project, and it also supports a lot of animation. So, you know, basically jQuery is something which helps you both with JavaScript and CSS. Okay, now if you are not familiar with DOM, which stands for Document Object Model, this is like a programming interface for HTML as well as XML documents, and it represents the page, so the programs can change the document structure, style, and the content. So basically, you know, every piece of code which we are writing, you know, this HTML tags, DOM tags, and so on, it creates this kind of tree, right? So you can imagine like a very simple page which has this HTML element and head. There should be obviously body over here, which is missing. But basically, you know what we're talking about, right? So you have like this head, and each and every node, each and every element is creating this kind of tree, right? So if you are about to find some tree, you can kind of follow this path to reach each and every element, and this is what we also gonna learn today. Okay, so since as I said, jQuery is a library. So we are basically installing this or using it as any other library. So what we have to do, we basically have to import it. So there are two ways. We can either go to jQuery webpage and download the files and then connect them locally load them locally from our computer, or what we can do, we can just use this starter from here, which I prepared for you. Or the other option is, if you download the file, you can just start from starter, and this index.html file is file which is prepared by me for you guys. So let me quickly open up this one. So I'm gonna start with this index.html, and as you can see, let me also open this up in a web browser. So starter, index.html, and we have this starting scheme over here. Okay, so let me check quickly what's there is some error over here. Let me quickly check why is it complaining about this one. It's body. Oh, this one is not closed. Okay, so we have our basic starter, and this is how you basically install jQuery to your application. How do you connect it? And I'm gonna use also a bootstrap, an MD bootstrap, because just to make these things look little bit just nicer, right? So let me start. Another thing is that what we're gonna learn about today are three main things. So first is jQuery methods, jQuery effects, and jQuery events. So let's start with the methods. And the very first thing which we have to start with when we talk about the jQuery is fact that, you know, jQuery is used to manipulate them. Or actually, let's have a look at an example, because, you know, I don't want to be boring talking guy. So let's just have a look at this example. So this 4 panels file, which is also there in a starter, it's something like this. So it's very simple content. So we have like 4 buttons and we have 4 bootstrap panels for this one. And what we're gonna use them to, what we will try to do, we're gonna try to manipulate them using a jQuery. Okay, so first thing which you should keep in mind is that jQuery allows you to manipulate DOM objects. So let's have a look at example. I'm gonna use some jQuery code here. If you don't understand it yet, no, don't worry. We're gonna go through it. I just wanna use some example for you so that we can start with one important thing. So guys, this is basically a simple example of catching up this element panel 1. So this one by ID. So each panel has this ID panel 1, and we're gonna use hide option. So if I'm gonna refresh the page, it should disappear, and it works like a charm, right? So nothing difficult, nothing catchy here. And by the way, as always, just let me remind you, if you guys have any question, if something isn't clear, just pose the question to the chat. If the question gonna be related to the jQuery, to the subject which we are talking about, I'm gonna answer this directly. And if you wanna ask me something else, I will be happy to answer all the questions after the learning part. So feel free to ask the questions. So coming back to the subject, as you see, what we've been doing here is that we used jQuery to hide this panel, but this is not a good way. And why it is so? Because in our case, guys, what happens here is that we have a very simple page over here, and when we refresh it, look how quickly it loads, right? You don't even see this loading button here, right? If I go to any other page, some, I don't know, Google, you can see that it changes this icon to this cross because it's loading. And in our case, it's so fast that you can barely see this cross. Sometimes it doesn't even appear. So what does it mean? This means that our content loads very, very quickly. But in the reality, whenever you are building some web page and this web page has some backend, it will take some time to load. It may take like 1 minute, 1 second, 2 seconds, 1 minute, it's definitely too long in 2020, but let's say that 5 seconds, it's still acceptable. So it will be loading. Therefore, before we start to manipulate any element on our website, we should have to make sure that it has been loaded. So how can we do that? How can we ensure that our page has been loaded? So in a pure JavaScript, we could use this kind of we could use document ready function in Java. In jQuery. In jQuery, we will be doing this that way. So we're gonna use this nomenclature, right? So we are saying document ready, and our function goes here. So what you basically do, you just do it as a placeholder, and you can write your JavaScript or jQuery script here. So what does it actually do? This is ensuring console. This is making sure that none of this JavaScript, which is between the brackets, will run before the entire document is loaded. So what does it mean is that until the page is loaded, so until it's still loading, it will not execute this JavaScript code. And this is very, very important, guys, because sooner or later you're gonna catch you're gonna deal with this error, and this is very nasty error because sometimes it may give you an error in console and sometimes may not. So what's gonna happen is that you will try, you're gonna attempt to change something, you're gonna attempt to edit something, you will see that all IDs are correct, that your code is correct, but it simply won't work. And the reason behind this is because it will try to execute while the web page is still loading. So this is very important, guys, to remember that this will save you a whole lot of time in the future. There is a shorter version of this one. It looks like this. And by the way, there is, although it doesn't really make sense to have two functions like this, but this is technically you can have this document ready functions next to each other. Of course, it doesn't make sense because it's just more smarter to to write everything in between. So what I'm usually doing is I'm just having this one of this placeholder, this or that, and I just leave some space here, and this is where I'm gonna write my JavaScript or jQuery functions. Okay, guys. So just to show you comparison if you would like to do it in JavaScript, it would look like this and that. So these two functions basically is doing the same. So you can already see that jQuery, this is the first example on how jQuery is simplifying JavaScript usage. Okay. Another thing to mention here is that as you already know, this function is so-called nameless function, doesn't have name. So this is the body of the function. But if you would like to, you can do something like that. So you can just provide a function name, and you have this function. If you have this function, for example, somewhere else, and this function is doing something, you can also do it like that. So after load, it's gonna run this function. Okay, that's about the loading. Just keep in mind for future, because that's gonna be very, very important, and it might be very tricky. So another point which I have here is Vanilla.js versus jQuery. So for those of you guys who doesn't know what Vanilla.js is, let me show you the code of the Vanilla.js. Vanilla.js is it's another framework, and the reason I'm laughing is that the entire code of Vanilla.js framework looks like that. So just 3 comments. Well, the reason behind it, this is kind of development joke. The reason behind it is that when it comes to when you work for the huge corporates, you may end up in situation or in the teams where your managers or your architects, they're gonna be so-called fanboys of frameworks. So they will say that the pure JavaScript or pure PHP or pure whatever language you can imagine is using this is bad, and you should be always using frameworks, which in general is it's right. It's a good approach. I mean, frameworks are there for you to use them to make your life easier, but on the other hand, it doesn't really, you shouldn't go to any kind of extreme, and sometimes it's just easier to write a few lines of pure JavaScript instead of loading some framework. So that's why someone came up with this Vanilla.js framework. So you can whenever you're using this pure JS, you can always say you can always say that you are using actually vanilla framework, which sounds much more sexier. Hello Ganesh, hello Luzin, hello Domenico from Italy, hello Vladimir from Delft, and hello everyone. Hello Simple Steps and Stanley from Dubai. Okay guys, so let me show you another example on how jQuery makes our life easier. So as you might know from our previous webinar, if we want to catch up to some element, some DOM element on our page, we would be doing this like, let's say, let p for some paragraph document get element by ID, and then we would provide some ID, right? Now, the same, we can do the same using jQuery simply by starting with $, opening the brackets and providing this selector like we've been doing with CSS. So this is equals to that, or equals actually is double, right? So you can see that first of all, it's much shorter, and second of all, you don't need to use different function for different options, right? Because for example, here you have get element by class name, for example, and how we can do it with jQuery. We simply says we can simply say $, dot class name. So we're gonna learn, I'm gonna show you more selectors in the future, but I hope you can already feel that this is much more shorter and much more, well, easier and powerful to use. So another example is the one which we know also from the previous example. If we want to set text for given paragraph like this one, we would have to do something like this. So document get element by ID panel 1 inner text some text, and this will replace our code here. And with the jQuery, what we have to do is just say panel 1 dot text some text, and I'm gonna comment this on out just to make sure that it works pretty much the same. You can even see that, for a second it's showing the old value here, and then it's replacing, right? So much shorter and much nicer way. So as you already noticed, this is a syntax which we will be using whenever we talk about the jQuery. So we have this selector and then some action, some function which we can use on that element. For selectors, let's have a look at the selectors. Let's have a look at the selectors for a second. As for selectors, we can do pretty much any kind of selector which can come to your mind. So we already seen this ID selector, like this one, panel 1. What we can also do is we can use class here, right? We can do some more complex logic. So we can say like intro, comma, dot demo. What does it mean? This means that it will choose an element which with the class intro or demo. So one of those has to be valid, and it will pick up this element. Other interesting selectors are obviously tag elements like P. So we take all the paragraphs and change the text to some text. So it's like document get element by tag and so on. you can say take first paragraph. So it will just take the first one, right? If you want to replace, for example, first list item on your list, you can also say last. So go through all of them and take the last one. What else we can do? We can say, we can do something like this, which means that will choose all the p elements or paragraphs that are a direct child of a div element, right? Of course, we could combine it with divs with some class and so on, or we could just simply say div p, so choose all the paragraphs that are descendants of a div element, and so on and so on. So there are a lot of different ways to use jQuery selectors, and I hope that you can already see that it is very powerful. So if you check lesson files, you will find these all examples there, so you don't need to know them by heart. But of course, you know, the more you use it, the more examples it will simply, you know, you will simply learn learn them by heart. So there is a question. There is a question from Aaron. How do you do a query selector all in a jQuery? Well, let's give this let's leave this at the end of the lesson. But well, to be honest, it's gonna be pretty much the same or similar to what we've been doing. So as you've seen already, you can provide a lot of selectors here, and jQuery simply. I mean, at the end, of course, jQuery cannot use anything which is not there in a JavaScript, in a pure JavaScript itself, right? Because yeah, it doesn't extend JavaScript. It just, you know, pack it. It just wrap it, and this makes usage of JavaScript just much easier, but underneath is using pretty much the same functions as the normal JavaScript uses. So we're gonna just, it's pretty much the same. So just simple. But there are some small differences, but they are like tiny. So let's not go that much detail. But I'm gonna answer that at the very end. Okay, guys. So as I said, you can catch pretty any element, DOM element on your page. And secondly, as I said, since jQuery is a wrapper around the JavaScript, you can pretty much do this all the stuff with which you could do with JavaScript. Sometimes it's just easier. So for example, what you can do, let's get back to a panel here. So panel 1, and instead of doing, hey Adrian, yes, this one is in English. The Polish one are on Thursdays, but feel free to stay with us because the English ones are ahead of Polish ones. Okay, so we can simply add class, right? So this is some new class, and this will, what it's gonna do, it's of course gonna whoops, oh, and it's not dollar, it's right, now it should work. So if we check our panel 1, it has new class added here, right? So our panel class has also card class. So what we can do, we can remove this card class, and then we refresh, boom, our styles are gone because we just removed. And as always, of course, we can also do panel 1, and we can of course toggle our class. Some toggle class. So toggle basically will check if this is there, so it will add it, and if this is not there, so if I refresh, the card is there, and if I'm gonna say card, it will remove it because it's there. So so it will toggle the classes. I got two comments on the same time, one on YouTube, one on Facebook. Bernard says, I find JavaScript to be harder compared to jQuery. And Naeem says, first one is easy to understand, I guess. So yeah, I mean, that's what jQuery is about, right? As I said, I mean, jQuery doesn't extend JavaScript at all. I mean, it doesn't add new functions. It just, it's reusing the same functions, and it just, make it usage much easier. And that's why I believe it is a very good idea to use these libraries, because what they are doing, they are making our life easier, because we don't have to take care of all that stuff. And let me show you just another example on how jQuery makes this our JavaScript usage easier. So we know that we can add classes already, but just look at this one. I mean, of course, well, it's a bad way. You shouldn't add directly styles, but for the sake of this tutorial, let's just do some exception for I made a typo for today. So if you really need to change the CSS of your element, you can simply do it by just saying your element CSS, and what you can do there is just say like color red. Oops. And it doesn't work. Oh, because I didn't say panel 1. Okay, so now this one is getting overridden by some bootstrap, but this one changed to red, right? So as you can see, it's very simple. What you have to remember and what you can't do is something like this. So we can of course provide more than one style, but what you can't do is something like margin top and then let's say 20 pixels, and that's not gonna work. And why? The reason behind it is this, because this is minus for JavaScript. This is minus for JavaScript. So basically it is like a math operation. So what there are two options to solve it. You can either use you can use quotes, and now it will treat it as a CSS. So now the margin will be applied. But the other option, and this again example of how jQuery is taking care of some part for you, is just to say margin top, and it will also understand what you were intending to do. So yet another example on how this works. So in general, this function works like that. So you provide the property name and the value. And the other interesting thing here is that, I mean, of course, you can specify more of them. You can make this more readable, doing like that. But another interesting thing is that you can use variables here. So let's do it like this. Let's design equals to margin top 20 pixels. Actually, I need to do it like this, sorry, because 20 pixels. Then let's say color red, and at the end background color black. And instead of providing all the styles here, what we can do, we can simply just pass a variable . We can just pass a variable, and as you can see, it will apply all the styles to our element. Okay, guys. So this is about methods which you can use. Of course, there are much more. I mean, there are many more you could use. So just go to the jQuery docs and find out more on functions. Now let's move to jQuery Effects, because you're gonna see that I think that you're also gonna find it very useful and very interesting. So what are jQuery Effects? So the jQuery library provides like several techniques for adding and animations to web page, and this includes like a simple standard animations that are frequently used, and this kind of ability to craft more sophisticated custom effects on that. So let's just have a look at an example, right? So I'm gonna remove this one as we don't need it anymore, and the very simple and very basic example which you very often use while building our web page is a simple hide. So what it does, it just hides the element, right? You can see that it's there for a millisecond and then it's getting hidden. Well, what's cool about JavaScript is that we can, if we want to add some transition to to it, some animation time, we can simply provide this as an argument to this function. And what's gonna happen is that, see, it will take longer, let's say 1000 milliseconds. And this is how it will change or slowly disappear, right? Everything is being taken care for you. Now, I mentioned at the very beginning that one of the big advantage of jQuery, it's so-called chaining. So what does it actually mean is that we don't have to, as long as we don't put a semicolon here, we can chain our functions to each other. So what does it mean is that we can just say hide, and now we can say show again. Let's say 500, and then again hide, and then again show. So this is pretty cool feature of chaining this function one to each other, because as you can see, jQuery will take care of this execution for us, right? So it will execute one after the other for you. Okay, so we know already that you can hide, that you can show elements, that you can chain them. So what are the other animation we can use? So there is a predefined function like fade in, and let's also check how fade out looks like. Oh, actually we should start with the fade out first, and then fade in. So it will disappear. Okay, let's make it a little bit longer so we could see what it does actually. So let it last 2 seconds. So it will be fading out and then fading in. So I hope you can already see that you can make a lot of interesting animations without actually even knowing a CSS for that. You can also do slide. So let's say slide up and slide down. Boom, and it simply works, right? The other interesting thing and very useful feature is that every time you are hiding something or showing something, you have to keep track of its state, right? I mean, so if this is hidden, you need to know that it's hidden, because then you want to you have to show it, right? Like, you know, whatever. If you go to Facebook, if you go to Facebook and you click on this icon, the logic behind it, I mean, it's always click, right? So the logic behind it is kind of, you have to go to you need to check whether this window, this small pop-up window, this modal is actually open or not. Because if it's if it is open, that you want to close it, and if it's closed, then you want to open it. So instead of, you know, doing all this logic by yourself, so basically, if user clicked on the icon, check if Windows is closed, then open it. Else, check if Windows is open, then close it. You can simply just say a slide toggle, and this will take care of this logic on your behalf, right? So if I'm gonna say slide up and then slide toggle, it will toggle down, because it's know that it's toggled. If I'm gonna do toggle again, it will now toggle down and now toggle up again, because it's know that it's toggled. So you don't have to take care of this one by yourself. It's taken care. So yeah. I mean, again, as I said on the previous webinar, guys, you need to keep in mind that you should understand how does it work and how is it happening. You know, you should know what's going underneath. But once you know what's going on, you don't have to write it all by yourself, right? So, of course, it isn't a good situation when you just know jQuery without knowing JS, and you don't even know how this slide animation is happening. This is definitely not where you want to end up. But once you know, and once you have this JavaScript understanding, and you could do all this stuff by yourself, then it's wise to use libraries. And this is this kind of rule you could apply to almost anything, right? I mean, of course, obviously you don't need to know every single line of code behind it, but at least you should know the mechanism, which is making sure that it's working. There are questions. Let me check. Saber, first, thank you for the session. Is there a performance drawback due to those features? Shout hide slide, which looks to be based on the changing the opacity over time. Of course there is. I mean, there is a drawback. I mean, but the different question which we should ask ourselves, or the actual question, is whether this drawback is meaningful or not. Because obviously, like each library, it's an extra overhead, right? I mean, the plain JavaScript, the vanilla JavaScript would be probably working much faster. I mean, much faster. Would be definitely faster. The question is how much faster you can get it, right? Because as you can see, since it's working, you know, almost immediately. I mean, if you take into account current computing power, computing speed of new PCs, if you take into account, you know, if you take into account the connection speed, you know, with you can have like gigabytes connection. You can have a fiber connection at your home in most, I mean, in many countries in the world. So it's getting fast. So obviously, 10 years back or 20 years back, it would be a huge drawback. Currently, well, you have to answer that yourself, right? I mean, of course, if you add too many animations, if you're gonna delay, it's not only gonna be affect your performance of the website, but it will definitely affect the level of irritation for the users, right? So if you make this last too long, I mean, people will just basically, get frustrated that it's taking so long. So yeah, I mean, obviously it's always important to keep it in mind. We don't want to use unnecessary libraries. There is no point in loading entire library if you want to just use one function. But on the other hand, I don't like going to any kind of extreme, right? I mean, I think in 2020 it is just wise to use jQuery if you know how to do it and if you are doing this wisely and in doing this in a proper way. Is that jQuery code is visible in Google Elements? I'm not sure what Naim you're asking, but this is basically HTML and we don't see here a jQuery itself. But here you can see our jQuery code. So this is a jQuery, but I'm not sure if I got your question correctly. Okay, and the last thing about jQuery effects before we will move on to the next chapter are delays. So again, there is this very useful and very handy function which is called delay, and you can just provide some kind of delay between the action to happen. So if you have use case like that, you can just add delays in between. So it will slide up, wait for a second, slide down, wait for another second, and then again. So let's move on to the next chapter, and let me quickly have a look at the questions. Okay, Naim, yes, I just got it. Thanks. So I answered the question about the jQuery code. Dejan is saying jQuery is very important for table sort. Yeah, I wouldn't say very important. It's very useful. That's for sure. I mean, again, you can do all the stuff with plain JavaScript. It will just be a little more difficult, and it will take more code written by you, but you can also do it with JavaScript. But yeah, I mean, the sorting and so on, this is very useful, and I'm gonna talk about it at the very end. Just remind me to show you, because just for your information, guys, if we go to jQuery website, and if you go to jQuery website, you're gonna see that jQuery has a couple of flavors here. So this is like a basic jQuery which we are using here, and this is where you can also find the docs for jQuery itself. But there is, for example, jQuery Ui, which is again sets of predefined functions like draggable, droppable. So you can easily, with use of jQuery, with jQuery, you can just implement this kind of stuff, right? Look at this one. So this is simply done by this small piece of code, right? So you just say that you want this div to be draggable, and boom, it works out of the box. Okay, guys, let's now continue. Bernard is asking about the resources on jQuery. So, of course, I strongly recommend to start with this repository for the lesson today, and go through all the examples. Just don't copy paste them. Don't copy paste them. Just try to retype them, even looking at them. By the way, guys, if you like our webinars, we would really much appreciate if you could star our repository. That will make it more visible to our other guys. So just get this one, and if you go through the tutorial lessons, you will see this, for example, jQuery Effects, which we've been talking about here. If you open this in a web browser, you will be able to see. You will be able to see this in that way, right? So you will have these functions here, so you can just use them. So this is like a very first And this is very first thing to do. Next, after that, you can go through our tutorials here on mdbootstrap.com. So I'm gonna leave the link on the chat as well. So this will be a little bit more advanced for you. And then if you need more, of course, that will depend on the use case you use. But you can always refer to the docs. Okay, guys, let's move on to the next subject, which is jQuery events. So, as you may remember from a previous tutorials, we can listen on a different, events using JavaScript. Right now, so until now, if you remember our lesson about the To-Do app, what we've been doing something like this: document, get element by, actually whatever we've been doing by ID. So that will be like panel 1, and then we've been adding event listener on this element, and we were saying that we want to listen on the click event, and we're gonna call my function, for example. So this is the JavaScript syntax for adding listeners, event listeners. Of course, as you can expect, using jQuery will be much easier. So let's have a look at this example. I want to listen on this button. So I want to click on this button, and I want to listen to this click. So how we can do, of course, start with a $, and then hash button1. And now what we'll do, we'll use on keyword, and then we'll provide two, pretty much the same like we've been doing here. So 2 arguments. The first one is what the event type we want to listen for, and then we want to provide our function name. And of course here we can have definition of our function, and we can say clicked. So I'm gonna remove this one, open a console, and it doesn't work. I use it. No, I use a dot instead of comma here. That's why it doesn't. So yeah, so as you can see, again, it's very, very simple to add the listener. So every time we click on this listener, on this button, it will trigger this function here. There's a question from Raul: how we can prevent overlaps for multiple draggable leaves in MDB. Let me get back to this one at the very end, because this is a little bit different from what we are right now saying, because jQuery UI, it's not the part for today, but after all, after the learning part, we can try to solve this one. Okay, guys, so since we know how to modify, how to use effects on different panels, and how to add listeners on different elements, let's try to build an accordion element, which you know from the Bootstrap, which we've been learning last Tuesday, ourselves. So let's, instead of doing a console log, let's just catch our panel 1, and let's just use slide toggle with, let's say, 500 millisecond. And let's call it panel toggle. So as you can see, using just 1, 2, 3, 4 lines of code, and actually we could make it even easier if we would use here nameless function. So we can even simplify it just within the 3 lines, or going to extreme, even a single line. We can create accordion using just a jQuery library. So I hope you can already see how useful and that can be. And obviously, okay, let me make it like, let me get back to more readable version. And obviously, as you know from a previous tutorial on the JavaScript, we can also use different events. So that doesn't necessarily have to be click. It can be, for example, like mouse over. And yeah, and if we do it, every time we put our mouse over the button, it will trigger this event, it will trigger this function. So I hope that you can already feel that this can give us also a nice, starting point for developing some games where, where you can split up your working area to some divs, and every time you move over the div, some things will happen. Okay, guys. So let's assume that we want to build this this accordion for more than one element, right? So I'm gonna revert this one to click, and I want to do it for more elements. So I'm gonna copy paste it. I'm gonna say button 2 invokes panel 2, button 3 will slide down or toggle panel number 3, and button number 4 will do same for panel number 4. So now we have this nice effect for all of them. Well, however, we have to, I have to admit that this is not the most efficient way of doing that, right? So whenever you are coding something, well, there is a rule. You should keep in mind this very important rule, which, regardless of language, programming language you're using, it applies to all of them, to all the languages. And this rule is called dry. So don't repeat yourself. Like, don't repeat, yourself. So dry, D-R-Y. So as you can see, we are actually repeating, we are doing something exactly opposite. So let's try to dry our code using jQuery. And how we're gonna do that is that instead of listening to each and every button separately, what we're gonna do is we're gonna try to listen all the button clicks, and we're gonna try to determine which button was clicked, and based on that we will try to invoke function on a certain panel. So you may know, you may be aware of that or not, that in HTML5 allows us to define or add our own attributes to the HTML tags, to the HTML elements. So how we can do it is basically, if you go to any element, I'm gonna go to my to buttons. What you can do, you can just say data dash and put whatever name you want here, right? So I'm gonna call it data panel, and I'm gonna say that this button is meant for data panel panel 1, and I'm gonna copy paste that to all of them, and obviously I'm gonna update the reference. So now we know that this button is meant for to invoke functions on this panel. So now let's check how we can find or listen to all those buttons at the same time. So we're gonna use selector like that. So we're gonna listen to all the buttons. So I'm gonna just use button. So if this is gonna happen, regardless of which button I click, it will always involve this function, and it will always toggle. It's always gonna toggle this panel number 1 here. And this is not of course what we are aiming for, but this is how you target all buttons. What you can do is that you can specify also that you want to target element or button which attribute data panel equals to panel 1. So this is just for information that it will work only on this one, right? So you can use this selectors, jQuery selectors, to target different elements based on its attributes values. So let's get back to the previous one. So we want to listen on buttons, and since we have just 4 buttons on this page, well, we can simply listen to all the button all the buttons on the page, because we don't have more than that. But if we had more buttons on the page and we would like to target only these 4, well, then we would have to do something else. We would have to find some other way. So for example, we could add some class to these buttons, like, I don't know, button panel, and then we could target it using a class name, right? So starting with dot and the class name. The other option would be to put all the buttons around some div, like I have here, but with some, for example, ID, and target this div, and then it's all children. So as you can see, there are plenty ways, as always, within the programming, within IT, to solve the same issue in a different way. Okay, so so we are listening to all the buttons. So what we have to do now is we have to determine to which panel this button is chained, is related for. So how to do that? For this, we're gonna use something new, and let's call it let's do it like this. So, and let's console log this one so you could see what it is. So now, as you can see, every time we are clicking on certain element, we are using this reference is giving us reference to this object which we just clicked. So we already have our button which we were looking for, right? So we have different buttons. So what we would like to also know or get out of it is this panel ID. So we could correlate this to that ID. So we're gonna do that using another function which is called attribute, actually attr, and this allows us to search for different attributes, values within a given element. So we're gonna search for the data panel, and once I refresh it, you will see that we got this panel here. Okay, so now, since we have this ID, there is nothing simpler than just grab this one. We need to concatenate hash, and we need to concatenate a hash and our panel ID, right? Because we use this hash selector when we want to grab something by ID. And what we have to do, what we want to do is want to slide toggle with 500 millisecond delay, and let's check, and let's remove this console log, and let's check if this works. Great. So this is what we've been looking for, and just to remind you, this is doing exactly same stuff as this we've been doing before. Okay, guys, so we already know pretty much not everything, but a lot on a jQuery itself, jQuery basics, on a jQuery methods, on a jQuery effects and events. So let's do some exercise right now. In the previous webinar, what we've been doing. Let me open the lesson files from a JS tutorial. So as you remember, we've been doing this app. So let me quickly clone this repository. So I'm gonna open a new folder here. I'm gonna clone it. Git bash here. Oops, I open up UI. I want to have bash here. I'm gonna say git clone. I'm gonna paste this repository. I'm gonna put dot at the very end, so it's not gonna create a new folder here. It's just gonna clone it over here. And by the way, just to remind you guys that if you are not familiar with Git itself, well, you definitely should. So this is one thing. And the other thing is that we made a special video for you. So this is available over here. So this is a short video when you can learn Git basics in less than 20 minutes. And if you don't know Git, you can just download this as a zip, right? So this is gonna download you a zip file, and you can unzip it and do it in an old-fashioned way, but definitely not, well, programmer's way. Okay, so guys, let's open this one. Let me close this one. I'm gonna get rid of this because we're not gonna edit this file anymore. So I'm gonna open this with a code. We have this final version here, and this is what we're gonna use. And let's open up this final version here. So we have a preview. And as you can see here in JS section, we've been doing some logic to this app using vanilla JS. So now let's have a look and try to modify this and use jQuery instead, and then we will compare the end result. So first of all, what we have to do is we have to we have to include the jQuery, right? So I'm gonna type jQuery CDN, and I'm gonna go for a minified version. And I'm gonna include this one in here. Okay, so we are loading jQuery. Now in our JavaScript file, as you guys remember, what we have to do first is we have to make sure that we're not gonna change any, that we're not gonna attempt to change any DOM object before the website is loaded. So we're gonna use this shorter version of document ready. We learned it at the very beginning, and let's start with let's do it one by one. So let's start with something simple. So we have this get element by ID, and we want to call this add task function. All right, so let's do it that way. I'm gonna move it here into our document ready. I'm gonna comment this out, so we will have the comparison, the old and the new way, and I'm gonna type $listen on our add element, and on click I want to trigger add task function, and let's see if our application still work. Task 1. Oops, something doesn't work. Scripts.js 26. Oops, I didn't close it correctly. It should be like this. Okay, so far so good. We replaced our first function with this document get element by ID. Okay, so actually what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna replace just 2 more things in this code, and I'm gonna leave the remaining part to you, because this is something or actually I'm gonna do 3 things which might be new for you, and the others are pretty much the same, so you will be able to finish that by yourself. So for the value, we're gonna do it how we can get the value from using jQuery. So let's do it like this. Let task equals $sign hash task. So the get element by ID by task, and in order to do it, we just need to use val function, right? So if we want to get this value, we do it like this. If you want to set this value, we provide new value here. Okay, so this is something, the tip is this something which you will be probably using somewhere here when we are setting up the value. But for now, let's see if this didn't break our application. It's still working fine. Okay, another thing for you guys is this insert adjacent HTML. For your information, this function uses like this before and after and so on, and in jQuery we are using this. There are 4 different functions for that. So if you look at this one, so this before begin is simply function before. This after begin is prepend. Before end is append, and this is used for after end. So in a jQuery, in that case, we have just separate version for different separate functions for this one. So let's quickly do this one, and you're gonna see again how simple it is. So. And by the way, you can use single or double brackets here. Quotes, sorry, doesn't really matter. So list, append, and variable. And I'm gonna remove this one because it's not gonna work. And I made some typo probably. List, of course, obviously. Okay, and it's working fine, right? So again, you can see how easier and more readable it is if you just use append, which is like self-descriptible. And the last thing, which I'm gonna change wavy, and I'm gonna leave the last functions for you, is this part. So how to do it in jQuery. How to do it in jQuery. Basically, actually, let's move it into this function ready. So we were gonna do it that way. So $sign list. Now something which you already know, on click, and we're gonna pass a function. We're gonna pass event as an argument, and we're gonna say let target equals, and this is something new here, event target, and now we will use toggle class done, and let's see if I didn't. Okay, it's working fine. Okay guys, so I hope you can already see that it's jQuery can save you a lot of time, that you also have this feeling that it's more like self-descriptive. It's using more natural language for you, which can be understood by more people. Yeah, I mean, again, I still believe that, I'm sure that this is still way to go in 2020, as jQuery is super useful library, as long as you know how to use it, as long as you don't try to build like another Facebook using it, and as you know that this is used for, help you with DOM manipulation, because this is what this is meant for. And I strongly encourage you to go through other tutorials which I paste for you, and get familiar with more functions and more options, because there is much more to learn. So if you check like jQuery Effects, and if you go to the jQuery documentation, you will see that you have also other option. You can stop the animation, and I think that will be mostly it. We covered most of them. Of course, there are more. There are like forms functions, and we're gonna talk about them in the next webinars. We will be building some real forms, and we will be also using. Actually, jQuery also makes it very easy to use Ajax. And we're gonna learn Ajax, I think, next Tuesday. So how to do asynchronous calls. So how to call backend and update the content without refreshing the page. And yeah, I mean, another important thing just for you to remember is this is jQuery Traversing. So this is like these functions for which I shown you before, to search for certain elements in a DOM structure. So get more familiar with get more familiar with this. Get more familiar with DOM, because this is something which you have to understand. Mark, you had the spell. Yeah, okay, I have a typo here. Thanks for letting me know. Yeah. So that's basically it. Nain is asking, what is Ajax? Yeah, I mean, Ajax is a way of how to say it in a simple way. Basically, this allows you to do asynchronous calls. So this allows your frontend to call a backend, and once backend reply with some content, you can refresh page. I mean, you can refresh the content without refreshing the page. And this is what I believe our next webinar next Tuesday is gonna be about. So just to remind you guys, here you will find more information about the future webinars, and also and future webinars, and you can also subscribe to the calendar event. I mean, you can download calendar event to edit, just not to miss it. Or if you know it by heart, just remember that every Tuesday there is new webinar. We are trying to keep it short, within 1 hour, the learning part, and of course there is more. There is more to cover in which you will find in the more advanced tutorials. Okay, guys, thank you very much for staying with me. From what I can see, it's more than 50 people watching right now. If you have any questions regarding like any IT subject, just feel free to post them right now. If you miss it, if you missed webinar, just keep in mind that we are keeping track of it. We are recording them, and they are available on the YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe to our channel. And turn on the notifications, so you will get the notification about next lives, and you will get notification about the all the new tutorials, because as I said, except for the tutorials, I mean the webinars, live webinars, we are also recording tutorials like the one about Git, like the one about Node, like many others, which you can find on our channels. So if you have any questions, just let me know. I'm gonna stay here as long as it needed to answer the questions. If you like this video, if you like this webinar, just please share it, just like it. This is the way the new algorithm of YouTube, Facebook works. I mean that we have to beg for those all interactions, because that just increases the visibility of the video there. Thank you, Przemek. Question how it worked with even, not even. Probably I didn't refresh the page, so that's why it worked. Let's see, just to make sure. Yeah, so now it's working fine. And yeah, I didn't refresh the page, so the previous one was working here. This one was still working. Vladimir, will we get a tutorial on Node.js with a saving to database? Yeah, sure, definitely. I mean, we'll have tutorials on Node.js. We'll have tutorials on Node.js. We'll also have tutorials on database. So we'll definitely have tutorial on how to create, on how to store data from forms into database, how to connect. So that's definitely gonna be there a little bit later, because the backend is the next part, but we will get there for sure. First, we'll start with calling APIs, so connecting our front end to the API using Ajax to call the API. But then we'll also actually in the future we'll also learn how to build an API, right? So we'll build an API, so every time someone calls our API, will store something in database or read from database. So I'm gonna teach you guys how to use databases, what are the different databases, when to use which database, when to use databases like SQL, when to use database like Mongo, and so on and so on. So we will definitely we'll be covering this one. As I said, our goal is to lead you through this path of how to become a developer, and how to go through a front-end part and a back-end part, and yeah, I'm just looking for, oh, this is the one. So this is the path, right? So we will be going through all the path because I want to give you guys like the basically a crash course on how to become a front-end developer. Okay, guys. If there are any other questions, Raul was asking about divs. I mean, to be honest, Raul, I'm not sure what you are talking about. So please, Raul, if you could just post this question for you on this group, and if you could just provide some code, sample code which doesn't work for you, and that will be much easier to help and to solve your issue. TJ, this was great. I love this and background information. You had discussion like. Great, TJ. I appreciate. I'm happy. I'm happy that it's useful. Yeah, just to give you some background, guys. I've been in IT for 10 years now. So I was also studying computer science, and I kind of have this feeling that I have some I'm in this kind of position where I can I have some right to give some judgments, and what I know for sure is that you don't need finish a university to become a developer. What you really need is like a patient, lot of practicing, some motivation. Just put your hands on a code and just do repeat, try again and learn. And I'm pretty sure everyone can really understand it. And I also know, since I've been studying computer science for like 5 years, and I know that this very, very often we are learning things there which I don't want to say they are not useful, but I would just learn those things in a totally different order as I'm doing right now, right? So first, let's put our hands on code, let's get basics, and later on we will get more into more advanced stuff like algorithms, like advanced data structures, and so on and so on. So I got just my feedback from me studying computer science, and that's why I'm trying to teach those stuff, these things in a different manner. Okay, guys, I don't see more question. So if you just missed something, or if I missed some question, or if this comes to your mind after all, just post your question. Post your question to our group. We are there with the developers, MDB developers, to help you to solve your issues. So we're gonna do our best to help you with all the questions. Or do not hesitate to ping me directly. Either on Facebook or on Twitter. Mark, yes, there was one. Okay, could you please remind me what was the question? Because I see a lot of messages popping up. Yeah, Mark, I think so. The reason it was working was that I didn't refresh it properly, right? So this code was still there. So what I did, I just, I saved this version. It's working. And then I start typing. And then I commented this out. I start typing, but I didn't refresh. So, any typo I do here, without refreshing the page, it still works, right? I have to refresh my page to get this one. and then it will probably won't and then it won't work right anymore. So okay guys, thank you very much for watching. Stay safe and see you next week, the same time, at the same place. Take care guys, and next week we're gonna learn about Ajax, so asynchronous calls. Hey guys, have a good evening or afternoon or whatever time zone you are. Just have a good time. Take care.